Hi, I'm Ardelia, and I stayed up all night sewing a dress for my niece's school dance. A dress stitched with memories, my mother's fabric, my hands, my heart. But the next morning, my sister looked at it and said, "She can't wear this. It looks poor." She crumpled it under a boutique bag like it was nothing. And that wasn't the worst part. She told everyone she designed it, then erased me from my own work. Again. Now the PTA's whispering, my niece is confused, and I'm left wondering, how long has my family been crafting stories that never included me? What happens when the quiet one finally speaks? The message was still glowing on my phone screen, as if the pixels themselves were embarrassed to carry it. Jonelle won't be wearing the dress. It looked poor, sorry. I read it again, and again. Each word was a slap disguised in politeness, every syllable soft enough to slip in, sharp enough to cut deep. Poor. That word didn't just describe the dress, it described me, my effort, my love, my place. A quote drifted through my head. Eleanor Roosevelt's voice, crisp and clipped, from a cassette my mother used to play while cooking. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Well, that might have been true in theory, but in this moment, I felt inferior. Not because I gave consent, but because I gave heart. I stood there in my kitchen, holding a mug of chamomile that had gone cold. The steam long disappeared, like my confidence. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of someone's dog. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, I found Jonelle standing there, her hand loosely wrapped around the strap of a tote bag. Beside her was Ray, Valora's ex, and Jonelle's dad. We hadn't seen each other much since the divorce. He offered a sheepish smile and held up a book. "Jonelle left this at my place," he said. "Thought I'd drop her off so she could grab it herself. She said she wanted to see you anyway." Jonelle beamed up at me like nothing had happened, like her mother hadn't just gutted me with a single word. "Dee Dee," she said, the nickname only she ever used. "I wore the dress all morning. I didn't want to take it off." She glanced around me into the house, then spotted the sewing table behind me, where a scrap of blue fabric still clung to the edge. Her eyes lit up. "Is that the same ribbon? The one you used on the sleeves?" I nodded slowly. "It is. I loved it. I mean, Mom didn't like it. But I did. I danced in it for hours." Before she saw, there was a pause. She wasn't asking for validation. She was offering it. "Well," I said, swallowing the burn in my throat. "That means more than you know." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a wrinkled drawing, crayon and glitter glue, the way kids tell the truth without needing words. "That's the dress," she said proudly. "I wanted to show it at school, but—" Her voice trailed off. She looked down. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew the rest. Ray gave me a small nod as if to say, "I know this isn't right, but I'm not part of that war." "I'll be back in 10, he said, heading back to his car. Once the door clicked shut behind her, Jonelle wandered into the living room, fingers tracing the fabric swatches pinned to the mood board. She was curious, not just about the clothes, but about where they came from, what they meant, who they remembered. She didn't ask why I looked tired, or why the dress wasn't hanging on display like it should be. Kids don't ask those questions, they just feel. When Ray returned and Jonelle waved goodbye, I sat back down, not to rest, but to steel myself. That evening, I got in my car and drove to Valora's. I didn't text first. I didn't knock when I arrived. I just rang the bell and waited. The porch light flickered on, casting that warm orange glow she always pretended was cozy, even though her house always felt cold. She opened the door, wearing one of those effortlessly rich workout sets, beige, branded, boring. "Ardelia," she said, like I was an appointment she forgot to cancel. "Do you have a minute?" She didn't answer, just stepped aside. Inside, her home smelled of vanilla candles and lemon pledge. Perfect. Plastic. "I got your message," I began. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? The one about the dress being too poor." She exhaled through her nose, slow, exaggerated. "Look, the school's fancy." I didn't want her showing up looking like she rolled out of a thrift store. I stood still, the weight of her words anchoring me in place. You asked me to make it, I said. I asked because Jonelle begged. I didn't think you'd take it that seriously. I stayed up all night, I replied, voice steady. I used Mom's fabric. I matched every stitch to her old sketches. I did it because I thought, maybe this time, it wouldn't be thrown away. She scoffed. She's a kid. She'll forget. My heart thumped in my chest, not out of fear, out of recognition. This was who she was, always had been. You should too, she added, dismissively. I didn't respond, just turned to leave. But then I saw it. Near the entryway, a paper shopping bag slumped beside a pair of pointed-toe heels. Inside, crushed and wrinkled, was the dress, the one I made, the one she called poor. Stuffed beneath a gleaming white boutique box, tissue paper spilling out like irony itself. She noticed me looking. What? She snapped. It didn't match the shoes. I nodded once, said nothing, just walked out. Back in my car, the dusk had deepened into that indigo hour when streetlights flicker to life and everything feels suspended. I didn't start the engine. I didn't cry. I thought about the diner down the block, the one we used to go to as kids, the one where Mom ordered sweet tea and wrote her grocery lists on napkins. I parked in front of it, engine off, and opened my phone. TikTok. My finger hovered over the app icon. Maybe it was time. Maybe they needed to see what I'd been stitching all these years. Not just dresses, but silence, sacrifice, skill. I tapped record. The light that crept through the blinds that morning was softer than usual, filtered through the thick gray of an overcast sky. Tacoma had always felt quiet in the early hours, but that morning the silence pressed heavier than it used to. I stood in the kitchen holding the same mug I hadn't washed since the night before. The word still hung there, unshakable. Poor. I muttered it aloud, letting it hang in the air. Poor. How effortlessly she'd said it. As if it were just a label, not a verdict. As if it hadn't been sewn into the hem of everything I'd done for that child. And yet, it echoed not just in my head, but through the very walls of this house. The walls my mother once painted in a color she called resilient lilac. The ones that still smelled faintly of linen and lavender oil. You want to fly, you gotta give up the thing that weighs you down, I remembered Toni Morrison once said. But what if the weight was the promise you made, the love you gave, the people you didn't want to leave behind? I put down the cup and walked to the sewing room, the one room I hadn't stepped into since that night. Dust clung to the window panes. The table was cluttered with half-cut patterns, tangled thread, spools that had long since run dry. I opened the cabinet. The scent hit me first. Cedar, old fabric, and something like time itself. Inside were pieces of my mother's world, bits of lace from a wedding gown she never finished for a friend who moved away. Cotton swatches labeled in her handwriting, steady, proud. My fingers brushed over a pale green velvet ribbon, the one she used to tie my braids with when I was 7. It felt like memory wrapped in softness. I sat down on the wooden stool and let myself sink into a moment I hadn't visited in years. I could see her there, my mother, leaning over me with her hands guiding mine, teaching me how to pull a needle through cloth without puckering it. You don't sew to close gaps, sweetheart, she said once. You sew to show you see what's been torn. That stuck with me. It was never about fashion for her. It was about attention, about care. She didn't just mend clothes, she mended the quiet parts of life people ignored. But now, that word, poor, was trying to tear what she'd built. I stood, turned toward the wall, and noticed something odd, a small latch, barely noticeable, on the side of the lower drawer. I hadn't seen it in years. I flipped it open. Tucked inside was a stack of folded fabrics, carefully layered, older than the rest. Beneath them, at the very bottom, was a letter, yellowed slightly, addressed to me in her script. But I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I reached for a different drawer and pulled out my old portfolio. Covered in dust, yes, but intact. Page after page of sketches, measurements, notes scribbled during coffee-fueled nights. Every design was a version of me trying to speak louder than my circumstances. I flipped to a sketch labeled Thanksgiving Pattern, 2008. The lines were clean. The silhouette was bold. That was the year before she died. That was also the year I promised I'd keep this family together, even if I had to do it alone. I didn't say it because I believed I could. I said it because she asked me to. Because her eyes, sunken from chemo and full of fire, begged me with a kind of faith I hadn't earned. I wanted to be worthy of that belief. I thought maybe, if I kept showing up, kept saying yes, kept sowing love into the places they left torn, it would be enough. But maybe it hadn't been love holding us together. Maybe it had been guilt. I got up, brushing off my jeans, and walked back to the main room. My eyes landed on the corner shelf where my mother's photo sat. She looked younger than I remembered, holding a thimble in one hand and my newborn self in the other. "I did everything you asked," I whispered to the frame, "but I don't think I can hold them together anymore. Not like this." I turned on the light in my studio for the first time in months. I cleaned. I reorganized. Not to start something new, but to reclaim what I had abandoned, trying to please them. My hands moved with a rhythm that felt buried but familiar. I sorted swatches by color. I tossed dried-out pens. I filled a jar with fresh thread and lined up my chalk sticks. By the time the sun pushed slightly through the gray clouds, the space looked possible. "If they won't see the work I do quietly," I muttered, "maybe it's time I make some noise." I leaned down to grab a box from the bottom shelf. It was heavier than I remembered. A red lid, slightly faded, one I hadn't touched in years. On top, written in my mother's unmistakable script, "Mom's last pattern, for Ardelia." I froze. My hands trembled as I slowly peeled the lid back. Inside, perfectly folded fabrics in rich burgundy, gold embroidery floss tucked to the side, a half-completed sketch with notes in the margins, and beneath it, a sealed envelope. It simply said, "When you're ready." I inhaled deeply. My heart thudded in a rhythm I hadn't felt since the day she left. "I forgot this even existed," I whispered. But now, I was ready to remember. The letter sat in my lap, creased at the corners from how long I'd held it, my thumb brushing along the ink like it might smudge her voice into the air. I'd read it 3 times now, but it was the same every time. Sharp, simple, unwavering. "If they can't see your light, let it blind them. You were born to build, not beg." It sounded exactly like her. No fluff, no sentiment soaked in pity, just a truth so clear it cut. I looked down at the sketch folded beneath the note, the final design she never got to make. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was her. And now, it was mine. "Guess it's our turn now, Mom." I whispered it like a pact. No one else needed to hear it. Just me and the memory of the woman who taught me how to thread a needle when I couldn't even tie my own shoes. I pushed away from the desk and walked into the living room, grabbing my phone from the coffee table. I opened the camera and held it toward the work table, the fabric, the light from the window streaking across the cloth like spotlight. I tapped record. "I'm starting something new," I said. "Not because I need to prove anything, but because I'm done being quiet about what I know how to do." I uploaded it under a new account, Threaded by Heart. The name had come to me while staring at the crushed dress in Valora's hallway the night before. They could stuff it in a bag and hide it beneath boutique tissue paper all they wanted. But they couldn't erase what I made, and I was done letting them pretend they could. By the time I hit post, my stomach had settled into a low hum. Not nerves, purpose. The next few hours blurred. I gathered the fabric for Mom's design, cut the pieces she never got to, pinned everything with more precision than I'd used in years. Each stitch felt like a word I'd kept in my mouth too long. And finally, I was speaking. As I was finishing the bodice layout, my phone rang. Valora. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. My voice was calm when I said, "Hello?" "Hey," she began, the tone way too casual for what was surely about to be another dig. "Just wanted to say, if anyone asks, maybe don't tell them you made the dress. I kind of already told the other moms I ordered it from this shop in Seattle." I blinked slowly. "You mean you took credit for it?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "It's not that deep, Ardelia. It was just a kid's event. You know how those things are? Everyone exaggerates. Funny how credit never matters until you're the one giving it away. She went quiet. I didn't say goodbye. I just hung up. No screaming. No storming off. Just a full stop. Later that evening, I needed a few new spools of thread and some trim to match the tones in Mom's sketch, so I drove into downtown and stepped into the little craft store off 7th that still smelled like school glue and old paper bags. The bell jingled overhead, the same way it did when Mom used to take me there on Sundays after church. I was scanning through the embroidery floss when a young woman behind the counter looked up and did a double take. "Oh my gosh," she said, walking around the counter. "You're the one from the sewing video, on TikTok, right? With the blue ribbon dress?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. My daughter saw it this morning. She's obsessed. She asked if I'd teach her to sew like the woman with the calm voice and strong hands. I smiled. Something small and quiet bloomed inside my chest. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." When I left, the sky had started to tint orange and purple, the kind of sky you only get after a day that didn't rush you. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind carry the weight off my shoulders. That night, I sat in my studio with my laptop open, uploading the time-lapse of finishing the hem. The video processed as I refreshed the screen, watching the numbers tick upward, 50, then 200, then 500 likes, and it had only been an hour, but it was one comment that made me pause. Who is this woman? I'd pay for that craftsmanship. I leaned back in my chair, rereading it. Let them wonder. Let them remember. I whispered, let's make them remember who I am. When I woke up, the first thing I heard wasn't birdsong or the low hum of traffic outside. It was my phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. Notifications lit up the screen like a pinball machine. My heart didn't race. It just thudded once, steady. I knew what this meant before I even touched the screen. Overnight, my video had passed 5,000 views, 5,000. Comments had poured in while I slept. Strangers praising the detail, the emotion, the hands behind the stitches. Some had tagged local craft influencers. A few even asked if I sold custom orders. There were hearts and fire emojis, sure, but it was the words that stayed with me. I felt every stitch. This is art. My grandma would have loved this. I set the phone down gently on the kitchen table. This wasn't about going viral. Not really. This isn't about followers, I said aloud, to no one but the coffee pot. It's about reclaiming what was mine. Around 10, Valora called. Can you come by later? She asked, too casually. We should talk about the dress drama. Clear the air. I almost laughed. Dress drama. As if this were some sitcom misunderstanding and not years of being erased, boiled down to one wrinkled dress stuffed under a branded box. Still, I agreed. I wanted to look her in the eye. By late morning, I pulled up to her house, half expecting it to be just her. Instead, I walked in to see Aunt Geneva on the couch, arms crossed, already frowning, and seated beside her, one of Valora's PTA friends, the overly polished kind with lip gloss that never smudged, and opinions that weren't hers until Valora whispered them. Glad you could join us, Valora said, like I'd shown up late to a performance. I didn't sit. We were just talking about how things can get blown out of proportion online. Aunt Geneva chimed in, her voice thick with condescension. Valora's been getting unnecessary flack. I folded my arms. Has she now? The PTA woman piped up. You know how these things spiral. One moment it's a sweet story, next thing everyone's acting like someone stole something. Valora smiled, tight, fake. Look, I just didn't want Jonelle to feel embarrassed. I wasn't trying to take anything away from you. Didn't want her to feel embarrassed? I repeated. By what? Her aunt's hands? Her family's love? Valora's face tightened. You're making this bigger than it is. No, I said, still standing. You are. You asked me to make something. I gave you part of myself. You buried it, then lied about where it came from. There was a pause. No one said anything. Then, like divine timing, Jonelle appeared in the hallway. None of us had seen her come in. She was holding the dress, the one Valora had stuffed away. She walked forward, silent, her small fingers clutching the fabric with the kind of reverence adults forget how to feel. "I found this in the laundry room," she said. "It still smells like the thread you used." She reached into the pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I didn't know what it was at first, but when she handed it to me, I realized it was a note she must have written after the recital was canceled. "Dee Dee, I'm sorry. I still love the dress. I didn't mean for it to go away. Jonelle." I looked at her. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were wide and soft and honest in a way the room wasn't ready for. My voice caught. "This," I said, lifting the dress, "is the only reason I haven't left this family behind." Aunt Geneva started to say something, but I cut her off with just a glance. I turned toward Valora. "This isn't a family meeting," I said. "It's a performance, and I'm done auditioning." I stepped toward the door, then paused. "Next time you want me invisible," I added, "you'll need more than silence and guilt to erase me." I walked out without waiting for a response. The air outside was cooler than I remembered. Or maybe it just felt that way because I could finally breathe. As I walked down the steps, my phone buzzed again. Email. Subject. Possible feature. Crafting with Ardelia. Community showcase proposal. I stared at it, then laughed, low and genuine. Let's see them spin this one. A week had passed, but the momentum hadn't slowed. If anything, it had multiplied. My second video, showing the final details of Mom's unfinished design, had crossed 50,000 views. I didn't know what algorithm gods were working in my favor, but comments poured in like a rising tide. "Who is this woman?" I would buy that in a heartbeat. Threaded by heart is the real deal. People tagged their favorite crafters, sewing bloggers, even textile historians. Someone messaged me asking to speak at their community center in Olympia. A journalist from Portland emailed for an interview. And in the middle of all that, I was getting invitations from places that had once slammed doors in my face. But none of it made me giddy. It made me steady. I sat in my studio, staring at the live stream schedule I'd planned for later that evening. My fingers hovered over the frame of Mom's final dress, now complete, the golden hem catching the last of the day's light. "If they won't invite me to the table," I muttered, "I'll build one." That night, I logged in, turned on the camera, and let the live stream begin. It wasn't flashy, just me, the dress, and a few bolts of cloth. But people joined. 10, then 20, then hundreds. I showed them the stitches, told them about my mom, explained how precision wasn't just technical, it was emotional. The chat blew up. "This is couture. I miss seeing work like this. Where can we buy from you?" It should have felt like validation. And in a small, quiet way, it did. But my chest didn't swell. It tightened, because I knew what was coming. And I was right. Later that night, after I'd signed off and taken the dishes to the sink, a notification popped up from an old friend I hadn't heard from in months. She'd forwarded me screenshots. A group text, the kind that wasn't supposed to leave the chat. The thread was between Valora and a handful of PTA moms. Names I knew too well. "She's just trying to make herself look like a martyr. We'll say it was a community effort. No one needs to know who really made it. She should be thanking us. Without the PTA attention, she'd still be sewing napkins." I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone. I just sat there, my knuckles clenched around the ceramic rim of my tea mug, letting the heat anchor me. Because there it was, proof that it was never about the dress or Jonelle. It was about power, image, control. "You can't kill what you didn't build," I said aloud. And I meant it. I opened a new email, attached the screenshots, and addressed it to the PTA president with one simple line. "I believe in transparency. No venom, no theatrics, just the truth." The next morning, an envelope waited in the mailbox, tucked neatly between junk catalogs and the latest credit union newsletter. The seal read, "Tacoma Arts Council." I knew what it was before I opened it. I had applied for the community grant nearly 6 months ago and never heard back. After the rejection, I hadn't bothered to follow up. But now, I slipped the paper free and read it slowly, as if my eyes didn't quite trust what they were seeing. Dear Ardelia, we're thrilled to inform you that your application for the Cultural Stitching Initiative has been approved. Your proposed program, focused on intergenerational textile storytelling, moved our review panel deeply. We believe your voice is exactly what Tacoma's cultural landscape needs. Welcome to the Downtown Cultural Center. My hands trembled slightly, not from shock, but from the grounding weight of it. They had said yes, not because of pity, not because of politics, because the work spoke louder than the room trying to silence me. I read the final line again. Your voice, through thread, has moved our community. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long minute. The room felt fuller somehow. Later that evening, just before turning in, I checked my inbox one last time. Subject, feature request, Northwest Designer Showcase, Seattle Art Museum. No exclamation points, no fluff, just an invitation, the kind that meant legitimacy, the kind they never sent to women like me. I stared at the screen for a long while until the words blurred slightly at the edges. I stitched through pain, I whispered. Now they're stitching me into history. Saturday afternoons had a different hum now, the kind of buzz you hear just before something cracks wide open. The Downtown Cultural Center buzzed with chatter as guests wandered in, peering at fabrics draped like art installations. I stood off to the side, fingers laced in front of me, watching them take in the display. At the center of it all was the final dress, deep crimson with gold detailing, exactly as Mom had sketched it all those years ago, and exactly how I'd finished it. My mother taught me to speak without words, I said, projecting gently for the small group gathered around me. Thread was her voice. Now it's mine. They nodded, some smiling with the kind of recognition that lives behind the eyes. A few asked questions. A woman in her 60s told me her grandmother was a seamstress during wartime and how watching the video felt like remembering something she didn't even know she'd lost. That moment filled me up in a way applause never had. But it was short-lived. My phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. I pulled it out and saw a notification from a friend. You need to see this. It was a link to a PTA-run local newsletter's digital edition. I clicked, and there she was. Valora, front and center in a new interview, smiling, hair perfectly curled, holding one of the mock-ups I'd used for a side-by-side comparison in my second video. Beneath her name, the headline read, "The inspiration behind Tacoma's newest textile star?" I hit play. It's all about community, Valora said, fake humility dripping from every word. Ardelia and I brainstormed the look together, just sisters sharing memories and materials. It was a collaboration from the heart. She was standing there, at my showcase, talking as if I'd been a side note in my own story. She's not just rewriting the story, I murmured. She's cutting me out of it again. The rest of the day was a blur of questions, messages, DMs, and half-hushed whispers as the attendees began seeing the interview on their phones. Some glanced at me awkwardly. Others were bold enough to ask, "Is it true she helped design it?" I kept my voice measured. Everything I displayed here today came from my mother's sketchbook, and my hands. That evening, after I returned home and kicked off my shoes, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the desk, and opened my email. Another message had come in, this one from a follower. No text, just an audio file labeled FYI. Curious, I clicked. Valora's voice came through, crackly but unmistakable. If Ardelia gains momentum, we lose control of the parent showcase. Keep her local. Distract her if you have to. She thrives on attention. No attention, no traction. I sat motionless, not angry, not even surprised, just still. They weren't just trying to erase me now. They were strategizing how to contain me. I didn't post the audio. That wasn't how I played this game. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop and began building something else. I called it Threaded Truths. It would be a mini documentary, 10 minutes at most, compiled from my sewing process, clips of Mom's voice on old VHS tapes, pages of her journal, and the full annotated timeline of how each piece had come together. No accusations, no naming names, just the truth. When I uploaded it the next day, I added a single line of text to the screen. Sometimes silence speaks louder than noise. And then I waited. The first 1,000 views came fast, then 5,000, then 20. By evening, it had cleared 100,000. My phone rang. Valora. I didn't answer. It went to voicemail. We need to talk, now. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat back and watched the view count climb. A quiet satisfaction spread through me, not from revenge, but from the sound of something finally snapping free. The lights inside the Seattle Art Museum were dimmed just enough to make the displays glow. I stood near the entrance, smoothing the front of my dress, reminding myself to breathe. This wasn't the kind of evening where you simply showed up, you stepped in with presence, and I had never been more present in my life. The main hall was buzzing. Curators, designers, journalists, and donors all mingled, glasses of champagne in hand, voices echoing under the vaulted ceiling. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone whisper, "That's her," threaded by heart. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. At the center of the exhibit was the final dress. Mom's design, my hands, our story. Deep crimson with gold embroidery that shimmered under gallery spotlights. The neckline structure was hers. The texture and layered stitching were mine. Together, it was both legacy and revolution. Then I saw her, Jonelle. She walked through the side entrance with Ray, wearing the blue dress, the one Valora tried to bury, but now it looked different. She had it paired with a soft belt, a new underskirt. It moved when she walked like it had always been meant for a night like this. The room hushed. People turned. Even the woman from Vogue, who'd barely glanced at me during setup, whispered, "Where did she get that piece?" I swallowed. That was the moment I knew the lie couldn't hold. A few minutes later, Valora arrived. She entered like she was owed a spotlight. Lipstick bold, heels louder than her intentions. When her eyes locked on Jonelle, her steps faltered. Then she found me. "Using my daughter now?" she hissed as she approached. "What is this? Some twisted PR stunt?" "She chose the dress," I said calmly. "She asked to wear it. She's 10. Exactly. And maybe for the first time, she chose love over labels." Valora glared, but before she could speak again, a voice echoed through the museum speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please gather near the center display for a special presentation." The crowd shifted toward the stage, and the MC stepped up, a folder in hand. He began reading from the event program. This year's featured designer, Ardelia Carter, brings to the table not only extraordinary technique, but an intergenerational narrative rarely captured in thread. Her work, a blend of memory and innovation, reflects the courage of women who refuse to be silent. People clapped. Valora didn't. I watched her jaw clench as the MC continued. She grew up under the quiet brilliance of her mother, Corinne, whose unfinished patterns have now found new life under the name Threaded by Heart. The applause thundered. I turned to face it. Valora stepped aside, lips tight, hands curled around her purse. As I made my way toward the podium, a reporter from the Seattle Times stepped forward. Valora tried to intercept, placing a manicured hand on his arm. He gently moved past her. "We'll talk after the show," he said. "Right now, we're here for the artist." I took the microphone, let the sound settle, then spoke. Every stitch I've sewn carried a woman who was told she wasn't enough. Tonight, I unpicked that lie. That was all. It was enough. The rest of the night moved like a dream. Small talks, handshakes, nods of respect I never thought I'd earn from these people, but I didn't float through it. I stood in it, owned it. Later, backstage, I slipped into the green room and opened my laptop. I needed a moment alone. And there it was, a headline already trending on local blogs. Stitched out how one family tried to hijack a legacy. Beneath it, screenshots from the PTA threads, audio clips, old interviews, and the closing photo. Valora, frozen mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes darting toward a camera she didn't expect. I leaned back. "You wanted control," I said under my breath. "You got exposure instead." The rain had been falling since dawn. Slow, steady, unbothered. It matched the heaviness of the air in Tacoma that morning, as if the entire city had agreed it was time for a reckoning. I sat by the window with my laptop open, a cooling cup of tea untouched beside me, and watched the drip patterns collect like commas on the glass. The article had dropped 2 days earlier. Stitched out, how one family tried to hijack a legacy. A regional news outlet had picked it up, then another. What began as whispers turned into headlines, and what had once been group chat gossip was now public record. The screenshots, the audio leaks, the clips of Valora at the art museum acting like a co-creator, everything was laid bare. There was no spin that could save it. Support came pouring in from old friends, strangers, even a few quiet PTA members who had messaged me things like, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner," and "We see you now." But the comments weren't all directed at me. Valora had lost her seat on the PTA board by Friday. One of the mom brands she endorsed pulled her affiliate code without ceremony. She was silent on all platforms, no Instagram posts, no TikTok lip syncs, just silence. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was release. I whispered to myself, truth doesn't always bring peace, but it brings light. That afternoon, I heard the familiar knock. 3 soft raps. Janelle. Ray stood just behind her, hands in pockets, unsure if this was okay. I opened the door, and Jonelle ran in, backpack bouncing, hair still damp from the mist outside. "Mom said I should stay here till things calm down," she said, plopping onto the couch like she had every right in the world. Ray cleared his throat. "She needs a few days," he said quietly. "The internet's been cruel." "Truth isn't cruel," I said, keeping my tone even. "It just doesn't lie for your comfort." He gave a short nod and left. Later that night, Jonelle and I sat at the kitchen table eating grilled cheese and tomato soup, same as Mom used to make on rainy days. The quiet stretched until Jonelle finally broke it. "Mom says you ruined her," she said. I put my spoon down gently. "But I think you freed her from the show." I looked at her, really looked at her. 10 years old, and already understanding more than some grown women ever will. I leaned forward. "Or maybe," I said slowly, "I just stopped letting her direct mine." She didn't smile, she just nodded. And in that, there was more understanding than I could have asked for. The next morning, just after I rinsed our breakfast dishes, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Nicolette. She hadn't changed much. Same deep auburn curls, same oversized tote bag slung over her shoulder, filled with fabric and ideas. I let her in, a little stunned. "You still using natural light in your studio?" she asked, walking in like no years had passed. "Still better than overhead fluorescence," I replied. She grinned and pulled out a folder, laying it open on the dining table. "I've been watching your videos, every single one. You've done what we used to dream about." I exhaled slowly. "Valora said I'd never finish anything." She paused, studying my face. "Yeah, she said that to me too, back in school. I believed her for a long time." I crossed the room and returned with my binder. Threaded Legacy. 40 completed designs, sketched, notated, tested, and ready. She flipped through it slowly, reverently. "Then let's finish something together. I've got space in LA, waiting for this." I didn't respond right away. I just let the idea settle. That night, after Jonelle had gone to bed and the wind tapped against the windows like it had something to say, I filmed one final video. No editing, just me, a chair, and a camera. "Forgiveness has no pattern," I said into the lens. "You don't owe healing to those who refuse to believe in your strength, but you owe it to yourself to live anyway, fully, without apology." I posted it and shut the laptop. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. "Valora. You win. Happy now?" I didn't listen to the rest. Instead, I slipped on a sweater, grabbed Jonelle's hand, and walked outside with her. The rain had stopped. The sky hadn't cleared, but it didn't need to. We stood on the porch, wind tugging at the loose curls near my neck, both of us looking at the small photo of Mom I kept on the entry table. I said it softly, but with every piece of resolve left in me. "Now, let's finish what she started." The letter arrived in a thick, ivory envelope. No stamps, just a museum crest embossed on the front, and my name, handwritten in ink that looked too elegant to have come from a mass-printed form letter. I stood in the kitchen holding it between my fingers like it might disappear if I blinked too long. Inside was a note from the lead curator at the Seattle Art Museum. It read, "Your work isn't just fashion, it's history, and we want to preserve that." They were acquiring one of my pieces, the red and gold centerpiece from the showcase, as part of their new textile heritage exhibit. It would hang alongside works by designers I'd only studied in books. And now, my name, threaded by heart, was stitched into their catalog like it belonged. I read the letter again. Then again. "They tried to erase me," I whispered, "and now I'm stitched into the record." The next day, I was back at the cultural center downtown, setting up for a new after-school program when a woman approached me. She wore a heavy raincoat, and a younger girl, maybe 10 or 11, trailed behind her with shy eyes and bright curiosity. "My daughter watched your workshop online," the woman said, "and for the first time, she said she wants to be a creator, not just a consumer." The girl peeked out from behind her mom's side and gave a tiny wave. I knelt to her level. "You ever held a real needle?" I asked. She shook her head. "Then today's a good day to start," I said, holding out a piece of fabric. From that moment on, I began teaching weekly sessions, not just stitching, but how to tell stories through your hands, how to pull thread through fabric like it was a sentence you hadn't yet said. I mentored girls from single-parent homes, refugee families, foster systems. They didn't need saving. They needed space, and I had space to give now. This was bigger than my story. This was what I was meant to build. One evening, after class ended and the girls ran off laughing into the arms of waiting guardians, I sat in the empty studio, soaking in the silence. It wasn't lonely, it was full. Then came a text from an old friend. "Valora's account just went dark, deleted." Apparently, the last of her brand deals had quietly dropped her. She hadn't posted in a week. A mutual friend told me she was still blaming the world, talking in circles about jealous people and smear campaigns. She never stitched anything real, I murmured, only stitched up versions of herself. Back home that night, I took out a notebook and began writing. Not a design sketch, not another pattern. A letter. "Dear Valora, I won't send this, but I'll write it anyway. You taught me how to survive silence. I thank you for that, because now I know how to speak without needing to yell. You didn't destroy me. You shaped me, like a pattern that needed to be trimmed, reshaped, and re-sewn with care. Not for you. For me, sometimes the sharpest scissors shape the cleanest silhouette." I closed the letter, folded it in thirds, and tucked it into the back of the same sketchbook I'd started the first day Mom handed me a needle. The next morning, a courier rang my doorbell. I opened the door to find a slim white box and a note in Nicolette's looping script. "LA is ready when you are." Inside was a key, silver and warm from the padded lining, tied to a simple leather tag. I held it up to the window, letting sunlight pass through it like some final symbol. "Next stitch?" I said to the empty room. My choice. The morning air was crisp. Tacoma in early spring always carried that stubborn chill, no matter what the calendar promised. Jonelle and I walked side by side through the old park on the edge of town, her sneakers crunching along the gravel path as she tried to balance on the narrow strip of stone lining it. She was humming something under her breath, something soft and tuneless, and I let the silence between us stretch like fabric on a frame. We passed the oak tree where my mother used to sit, embroidery hoop in hand, the bench just a few feet ahead. It looked older now, weathered but still sturdy, like it had waited for me. I nodded toward it. "Let's rest here a minute." Janelle plopped down first, legs swinging. I sat beside her, staring at the patch of grass my mother always said had the best morning light. "This place," I said, "always reminded me that the quiet ones often carried the most weight." She tilted her head, thinking on it. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small drawstring pouch. Inside was the first needle and thread set my mother ever gave me, worn but clean. I placed it in Jonelle's hands. "She gave this to me when I was just a little older than you," I said. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was just a tool. But it became a voice, a way of holding the world together when I didn't know how to speak. Jonelle ran her fingers over the thread like it was something sacred. Is it mine now? It's yours when you decide what to do with it. For a moment, we just listened to the wind in the trees. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded letter. I didn't open it. I knew every word. I wrote this, I said. But I never sent it. It was for your mom. Jonelle leaned in closer, listening. I began reading. You taught me to survive silence. I thank you for that. Because now I know how to speak without needing to yell. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel Jonelle's breath still beside me. You didn't destroy me. You shaped me like a pattern that needed to be redrawn, not discarded. When I finished, she blinked up at me. No questions, no corrections, just understanding. She won't say sorry, she said. I know, I replied. But maybe she'll say something else someday. As we stood to leave, I saw her, Valora, standing by her car at the far edge of the lot, one hand gripping the strap of her purse like it was holding her upright. She looked thinner, drawn in the way stress doesn't announce but settles in. I almost kept walking, but she stepped forward. I came here to apologize, she said quietly. But I think I'm too late. Her voice wasn't bitter, just worn down. I glanced at Jonelle and then back to Valora. You're not too late for her. I didn't need to say more. She walked slowly toward her daughter, knelt, and wrapped her arms around her. No big apology, no speech, just a hug that spoke of things unsaid. Jonelle didn't resist. She just held on. And I stood a few steps away, watching the scene like someone who'd already read the book and was just waiting for the last page to turn. Forgiveness isn't a bridge we all walk together, I thought. Sometimes it's just the path I take so I don't carry the weight anymore. I didn't wait for goodbye. I turned and walked back to the car. The sun was starting to break through the clouds, just a little. It was enough. Later that afternoon, back at home, I opened the one box I had always avoided. It was tucked deep in the hallway closet behind winter coats and half-used bolts of cloth. Inside was a journal, my mother's, filled with sketches, clippings, her loopy handwriting stretching across margins like vines. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I flipped through slowly, page by page. Thoughts about stitch types, musings on color theory, tiny quotes she must have loved enough to save, and on the last page, scrawled in black ink, "My legacy isn't a name, it's a pattern my daughter will complete." I closed the book. It's time, I whispered. The air in Los Angeles didn't cling like it did back home. It moved lighter, faster, always on its way somewhere. Jonelle and I stepped out of the cab, each of us with a suitcase in one hand and a future in the other. She clutched a sketch pad I'd given her the week before, already scribbled with half a dozen designs. I had the studio key Nicolette had sent, pressed into my palm like a quiet affirmation. We walked into the space together. Nicolette's studio was part of an old warehouse turned creative loft, sunlight flooding in through tall industrial windows. On the freshly painted wall beside the entrance, a new sign gleamed, threaded by Heart Studio, Ardelia C. I stood there longer than I needed to, letting the sight soak into me. It was more than a space. It was a declaration, a home stitched into the future. 2 days later, the national feature dropped. A spread in American Textile Review titled, "The New Voice of Artisan America." Photos of the showcase, snippets from my live streams, and an interview quote I hadn't realized would hit so hard. A stitched lie nearly unraveled me, so I stitched my own truth louder. That line circled the internet like a banner. And then came the unveiling, the final dress. Mom's original sketch, modernized, fierce, and unapologetically mine. Redefined neckline, embroidered memory panels, her initials tucked inside the hem in gold thread. When the cloth was pulled off the display stand and the lights hit it, there wasn't a sound in the room. And then, applause. Not polite, not out of obligation. It came from somewhere real. A reporter leaned over during the reception. Do you think you've won? I sipped my water. This wasn't about winning, I said. This was about finishing. Later that week, an envelope arrived at the studio. No return address, just the crisp imprint of a legal firm. Valora, a cease and desist letter. Demanding credit, compensation, a full statement acknowledging her influence. I read it twice, laughed once, then handed it to my lawyer, who filed a formal countersuit within 24 hours, backed by timestamps, process footage, and interviews. She withdrew everything before the next morning. I didn't post about the legal mess, just a single line on my feed. Paper burns fast, pattern lasts longer. At the next press event, I stood before a crowd of designers, students, and women who'd come up through their own forms of silence. Jonelle sat in the front row, camera in hand. I took the mic and said, "They tried to make me disappear. Instead, I multiplied. So here's what we're going to do. Starting next month, Threaded by Heart is launching a free mentorship program for every girl who was told to sit still, keep quiet, and wear what she was given." The room rose in applause. Afterward, I stood alone for a moment, letting the weight settle in my chest, not heavy like burden, but full like legacy. Then a young assistant approached, envelope in hand. "A note just arrived for you," she said, barely hiding her grin. I opened it slowly. "We saw your work. We'd like you in Milan. La Fonde Couture, Global Showcase Team." I read it once, then again. Jonelle ran up beside me, eyes wide. "Is it from them?" I nodded, folding the note and slipping it into my pocket. "It is." She tilted her head. "So, what now?" I smiled, turned to her and said, "Let's see what we can sew next." The air in Los Angeles didn't cling like it did back home. It moved lighter, faster, always on its way somewhere. Jonelle and I stepped out of the cab, each of us with a suitcase in one hand and a future in the other. She clutched a sketch pad I'd given her the week before, already scribbled with half a dozen designs. I had the studio key Nicolette had sent, pressed into my palm like a quiet affirmation. We walked into the space together. Nicolette's studio was part of an old warehouse turned creative loft, sunlight flooding in through tall industrial windows. On the freshly painted wall beside the entrance, a new sign gleamed, Threaded by Heart Studio, Ardelia C. I stood there longer than I needed to, letting the sight soak into me. It was more than a space. It was a declaration, a home stitched into the future. 2 days later, the national feature dropped. A spread in American Textile Review titled, "The New Voice of Artisan America." Photos of the showcase, snippets from my live streams, and an interview quote I hadn't realized would hit so hard. A stitched lie nearly unraveled me, so I stitched my own truth louder. That line circled the internet like a banner, and then came the unveiling, the final dress. Mom's original sketch, modernized, fierce, and unapologetically mine, redefined neckline, embroidered memory panels, her initials tucked inside the hem in gold thread. When the cloth was pulled off the display stand and the lights hit it, there wasn't a sound in the room. And then, applause, not polite, not out of obligation, it came from somewhere real. A reporter leaned over during the reception. "Do you think you've won?" I sipped my water. "This wasn't about winning," I said. "This was about finishing." Later that week, an envelope arrived at the studio. No return address, just the crisp imprint of a legal firm. Valora, a cease and desist letter, demanding credit, compensation, a full statement acknowledging her influence. I read it twice, laughed once, then handed it to my lawyer, who filed a formal countersuit within 24 hours, backed by timestamps, process footage, and interviews. She withdrew everything before the next morning. I didn't post about the legal mess, just a single line on my feed. Paper burns fast, pattern lasts longer. At the next press event, I stood before a crowd of designers, students, and women who'd come up through their own forms of silence. Jonelle sat in the front row, camera in hand. I took the mic and said, "They tried to make me disappear. Instead, I multiplied. So here's what we're going to do. Starting next month, Threaded by Heart is launching a free mentorship program for every girl who was told to sit still, keep quiet, and wear what she was given." The room rose in applause. Afterward, I stood alone for a moment, letting the weight settle in my chest. Not heavy like burden, but full like legacy. Then a young assistant approached, envelope in hand. "A note just arrived for you," she said, barely hiding her grin. I opened it slowly. "We saw your work. We'd like you in Milan. La Fonde Couture, Global Showcase Team." I read it once, then again. Jonelle ran up beside me, eyes wide. "Is it from them?" I nodded, folding the note and slipping it into my pocket. "It is." She tilted her head. "So, what now?" I smiled, turned to her and said, "Let's see what we can sew next."